Chapter 6. Escape. Forced to ride in the cart with old Hannah and the little ones, Oren sat squeezed tightly against the wooden rails. Carefully he stretched his feet between two children sound asleep on the floor. Pale light from the cloud illuminated everything about him. Marching people, eerie beds of seaweed, strange stone shapes, and once what seemed to be the hulk of an old boat half covered with weeds. One of the cartwheels struck a large rock, bouncing him against the hard wood of the floor. From her corner, Hannah groaned, if the Egyptians do not get us, this donkey cart will." Oren watched her old head nod till she fell asleep again. "How can this thing be?" he thought. "We are in the middle of the sea where the water should be, and it is like dry land." He yearned to look closer at the wonders that lay scattered all about him, but his father had sternly forbidden him to leave the cart. Around his neck the precious pouch hung, its contents safe. He would write about this night once they were across the sea and out of danger. Passer's gift of ink and papyrus would not go unused. At the thought of Passer, heaviness crept upon Oren until he felt his eyes closing. Rem walked behind his uncle Shobal's goats, a silent Abishur at his side. Dreams were like this, he thought. Maybe this was a dream. One minute he stood with the men ready to fight, waiting for the sure death that drove toward them in iron chariots. The next he was running to the sea and finding it indeed gone. Gingerly he stepped over a strange quill-like mound that quivered slightly as he looked at it. Was he dreaming? He looked at Abishur as if for an answer. Abishur's face was full of anguish. "My father was wrong, Ram. I knew it, and I didn't warn you. I should have tried." Anger choked his voice. "He's stubborn as a donkey. No one can make him listen to reason once his mind is made up." Ram knew it was true. Hadn't he done the same? "Abishur, it isn't like you think. From the start I doubted Moses, doubted Yahweh." Ram pressed a fist tightly to his forehead. "None of this seems real yet." Abishur shook his head. "There's nothing I can do. Shobal is my father. I'm his son and have to stay with him. What scares me, Ram, is the way he can persuade others to follow him." For a long while the two walked in silence, each wrapped in his own misery. Cut off from the rest of the family, Tirzah and her cousins plodded on. Tirzah could barely feel her legs and her arms were heavy weights. Sari balked at the dark patch of weeds in her path, making Tirzah stumble over her own feet as she reached out to prod her. Jerking the rope around the donkey's neck, she pulled her to the right. For a while the seabed had been smooth, but now reeds seemed to spread in their way almost everywhere. Suddenly the reason flashed like a light through her. They must be nearing the other shore. "The shore, the shore," she cried. It was true. Helping hands reached out to grab Sari's rope, and then her father's strong arms were lifting her, carrying her. Sobbing, Nahalath fell into her mother's embrace, followed by a tired Maha. Tirzah closed her eyes, content to be carried like a baby. She must have slept. Surrounded by piles of baggage, she sat up, brushing the sleep from her eyes. Would she never learn to stay awake? What was all the noise? Cries and shouts of people and the wailing of children brought her to her feet at once. "The Egyptians must be coming after us," she exclaimed. Wildly, Tirzah looked for her mother and the others. Had they gone without her? On the rocks behind her, people were standing in thick knots. On the sandy shore below them, others waved their hands, shouting, while some ran back onto the seafloor to hurry the last of the marchers. In the light of the cloud, Tirzah saw the whole scene, and her heart beat faster. The chariots of the Pharaoh were coming. Already they were halfway across the seafloor. Someone screamed as Tirzah ran for the nearest rock, slipping and clawing her way to its top. "Oh, Yahweh, help us!" she cried in her heart. Standing on the rock, she could see the chariots of iron far out in the sea. Every Hebrew man, woman, child, and animal was on the shore now, but it was too late to flee farther. Where could they go to hide from such a great army? As if she were bound to the rock, Tirzah stood upon it, unable to take her eyes away from the awful sight before her. Over the clamor of people wailing and crying to Yahweh, she thought she could hear the shouts of the soldiers. Some of the heavy chariots were bogging down in the mud and getting stuck, causing others following to crash into each other. It was happening everywhere that Tirzah looked. Chariot after chariot turned over, their giant wheels spinning helplessly. From the front line to as far as she could make out, the chariots were in a tangled mass of accidents. As she watched, the confusion seemed to grow worse. Some of the chariots now righted and were turning back away from the shore. Tirzah clapped her hands for joy. The Egyptians were retreating. Then to her horror, a path opened, and through it came other chariots driving swiftly, the horses almost flying. Stunned, Tirzah barely noticed the pale light of dawn beginning to streak the sky. All about her people wept and cried out. Then suddenly there was a growing hush. The wind had changed. From far out in the sea, she had heard the sound of thunder roar. The Egyptians had heard it too and were struggling to go back. Too late. They saw the sea rushing toward them. In moments, their cries were smothered in the swiftly moving water. Tirzah could hardly believe her eyes. In the light of the morning sun now climbing into the sky, the sea returned to its bed, claiming all in its path. Drowned, Tirzah whispered. Iron chariots, horses, soldiers, all were gone. The army of Egypt had vanished. Out of the hushed crowd, Moses' voice rose in a mighty shout of victory. As if on signal, the people echoed him with a shout after shout. Tirzah scrambled down the face of her rock and into the crowd. Everywhere people were singing and dancing and laughing all at once. Almost instantly she was caught up in the nearest group of dancers. A score of tambourines appeared to join the flutes already playing. Never, never had there been such a celebration. When the sun was at its height, people rested on cloaks and cloths spread on the ground. Those who had food shared it with those who had none. As they ate and rested, a few hardy ones continued to play the pipes. Tirzah stretched herself full length beside Abihail and listened. Overhead a seabird whirled, then glided on its silver-white wings. When we get to Canaan, Abihail was saying, I will ask Mother to make me a tambourine from the scraps of the next goatskin, and you must ask yours to make you one. Lazily, Tirzah wiggled her toes and pictured herself dancing, tambourine in one hand. Secretly, she would much rather have played a pipe like Abishur's. Listen, Tirzah said, half rising on her elbows. Someone was calling for silence. Moses was going to speak, and the words spread throughout the camp like a ripple across a lake. Once more Moses stood on a rock near the water and raised his arms. In a strong, deep voice he taught them a song of praise to Yahweh for his deliverance. Line after line the people sang like a great festival chorus. I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he has hurled into the sea. It was a mighty song, and Tirzah thought her heart would burst for pride and joy. When it was finished, the people cheered. Surely the Lord had risen up in triumph. Look! Abihail pointed to the tall woman in the blue robe who stood below Moses on the rock formation, a tambourine held high above her head. It's Miriam, and she's calling for the women to join her. Oh, Tirzah, how I wish we had our tambourines now, Abihail cried out. It was true. Women were streaming towards Miriam, shaking their tambourines joyously. The girls watched Miriam join the women and begin the song. Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and the rider he has hurled into the sea. This time the music was even livelier as the women danced, shaking their tambourines and singing. It was late in the night when Tirzah lay down by the dying fire. The camp was quiet now, the stars bright overhead. From the north a soft light shone from the cloud. Tirzah sighed a happy little sigh. What a glorious day! She would remember it for the rest of her life. Oren whistled contentedly, and she glanced over at him sleepily. He shifted his head to look at her. You know, Tiz, when we get to Canaan, I'm going to write this all down. Tirzah thought she heard him humming, but her eyes were closing.